something else, of course, which has changed in the last week. The US election, quite a clear result, really, for former President, now President-elect Donald Trump. And lots of questions about what happened, why it happened, and what on earth will happen next. Joining us on the program now is Professor Robert Patman. He's Professor of International Relations at the University of Otago. Robert, kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure, Andrew.
Whether or not people are happy or upset about this, there's a lot to talk about on this one. Essentially, as the night unfolded, myself, like a lot of other people, were watching the various channels to see the various states tick over either red or blue. What actually happened on the night, and what were some of the causal factors behind it, Robin?
Well, I think this election, it was a closely contested election. Mr. Trump has won a decisive victory, but it was closely contested. It wasn't a landslide, as some people have depicted it. And of course, it all hinged on the battleground states, 7 states. And I think there were several factors here. Mr. Trump expanded his electoral base in ways that many of us hadn't anticipated. He got a lot of Hispanic and Latino votes. And also he attracted the support of many young males, particularly those without college education.
Yeah.
And, what was, I think, stunning for many observers, both inside and outside the US, was that Mr. Trump ran an extraordinary campaign. It was openly racist, openly sexist, openly xenophobic. He also described the Kamala Harris team in most unflattering terms as scum, vermin, and he also described them as the enemy within. So
yeah.
He basically and he kept that right up. I watched him in his last speech in Michigan, his last campaign speech, and it was a litany of grievances, and he didn't pull any punches. So how did he do it? I think basically, the economy was a huge factor, and he always used to start off his speeches by saying to his audience, "Do you feel better off now than you did at when I left office," sort of thing. Well, he didn't say I left office because he never, according to Mr. Trump, he never lost the election. So when he departed from the scene, and I think that many Americans who've experienced the after effects of COVID, the expenses involved in that, and also something that was beyond the control of any decision maker, which was the after effects of the if you like, the consequences of the war the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Between those two countries, they produced 25% of the world's grain. So that had huge consequences. Once those two countries started in conflict with each other, that had a huge impact for people's cost of living. We felt it in New Zealand.
Yep.
We've seen grocery prices go up substantially. And of course, I think that's a major complaint for many Americans, is that they've seen their grocery bills and their gas bills go up dramatically. So I think ultimately Mr. Trump's list of grievances, particularly on the economic side, really struck home.
And democracy has won at the end of the day. There were more people in the United States that were in favor of Trump and his policies and the promises of a better future than there were people that were opposed to him. And certainly he had the momentum early on in the race, but lots of questions also being asked about what went wrong for the Democrats? Because as you say, there were some strong statements. There was plenty of opportunity to push back against those.
Oh, yeah.
But for whatever reason, the messages that the Democrats were peddling, what they were offering, nobody was buying. Well, not enough people were buying, I should say.
That's true. And I think one thing the Democrats did, and I know we discussed it before, Andrew, so I won't dwell on it, and that is they changed their candidate.
Yep.
Mr. Biden bowed out after that disastrous debate with Mr. Trump. And I think Kamala Harris actually did relatively well, given the fact that she inherited the position at relatively constrained time frame. She only had a few months to get ready and up to speed.
Yeah.
as the major contender. That's enough time, by the way. So I'm not trying to defend her in any way. I'm just saying she didn't have. I mean, Mr. Trump was running at this essentially from the moment he left office. So he was able to prepare carefully. So there was the constrained circumstances in which Harris took over. Her rally events were very well attended. In fact, she got huge crowds.
Yeah.
And she performed very well in the second debate. And Mr. Trump wisely chose not to have a third debate from his point of view. Where I think she did, I think her political instincts let her down. And what I mean by that is that she was asked in quite a friendly interview with Politico, would she change anything that the Biden administration had done? And she basically said no, she wouldn't. And she had been involved in most of the decision making. Apparently her advisors were absolutely horror-stricken with the answer. In other words, she probably didn't distance herself enough from some of the less popular aspects of Biden's policies. And one aspect which really hurt her, particularly in Michigan, was her apparent continued support for Biden's policy of almost unconditional support for Israel in Gaza. Arab Americans voted in droves for Donald Trump, who promised peace.
Which, ironically, this is the same president that wanted to send all Arab Americans and ban Arab Americans even visiting. But
he's a mercurial character, Mr. Trump. And what was striking is that Trump personally went to Michigan, met with community leaders, and sat down and signed a 5-point agreement with them. So his position will be interesting to watch now. He knows that Arab Americans helped get Mr. Trump over the top in Michigan, a key battleground state. So that may well frame his stance going forward to the situation in the Middle East. So we may be in for some prizes.
So the art of the deal, as it were. Now,
I always get the sense that Mr. Trump's quite capable of doing a deal with Iran. Many people were shocked when he started sending love letters to Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader. They had a big row for 2 years, and suddenly they were all friends. So, Mr. Trump may confound and surprise some of his supporters. He's quite capable of dramatic change, and he shouldn't be underestimated on that front. But why did Kamala Harris lose? I think ultimately her political instincts let her down. Ultimately, she faced a very difficult task. She was the incumbent vice president. She had to defend the administration. And at the same time, she had to present herself as fresh and new. I think ultimately that, stating the obvious, I think, Mr. Trump's grievances won out against her pledge to take America in a more egalitarian direction.
People voted for change as much as anything else in that regard. When it comes to what happens next, and there'll be lots of analysis about, as you say, how this will affect what is happening in the Middle East and in Ukraine. That will be very interesting indeed, given some of the pledges that Donald Trump has made. But what does this mean for us here in New Zealand? Are we somewhat insulated from the impact of this?
No, not at all. It's going to affect us quite dramatically and quickly. And I've been very intrigued by the responses of Mr. Peters and Mr. Luxon, because Mr. Trump, one of his key election pledges, which got him a lot of working class support, or middle class support, as they call it in the United States, was to put 10% tariffs on all imports into the US. The US is now our second biggest export destination. So we as an agricultural exporter will actually be quite significantly hit if Mr. Trump follows through with the pledge once he's in office after January the 20th. That I've heard people saying, well, maybe we can negotiate an exemption. I'm not sure we're economically important enough to the United States. They are very important to us, but it's not a two-way importance, if you see what I mean.
Exactly.
And so I think that Mr. Trump will feel honor bound to go through with his pledge. I happen to feel, actually, we should be quite vigorous on this and and make it quite clear. I mean, both the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, they undermined the WTO, which was a great ally of New Zealand, World Trade Organization, and we won all seven trade disputes there we've had with other countries. Now that's been undermined and taken out of the play. We should be campaigning, I think, and vigorously on free trade. Ultimately, it's in America's interest, I believe, for a free trading system. Mr. Trump has put his cards on the table, and it's protectionism. But that's short term rather than long term. But yeah, we will definitely be affected. I think the other area where it's going to affect the government, if they do want to pursue the option of membership of AUKUS through what's called Pillar 2, which is sharing cutting-edge defense technology, I think that ironically has become more difficult with Mr. Trump in power than with Kamala Harris, had she prevailed.
As you say, though, there's this extremely long changeover period. Yes, we have a clear result, but it's going to be the end of January. It's going to be the end of the New Zealand summer just about before some of this kicks in. But hey, that's a story for another day.
But, they have a lot of appointments to make, so maybe it's just as well he's got a few months.
Exactly. A lot of boxes to pack and unpack in that regard. Robert, we appreciate your analysis. As always, thanks so much for joining us. Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.